My name is Sophie. I'm 38 years old, and I live just outside Denver with my husband, Ethan. To everyone around us, I appear to be a full-time homemaker. What most people don't realize is that behind that simple image, I actually run a medical supply company that earns millions in annual revenue. My personal income is about $128,000 a year, but Ethan has never known the truth. We met at a college reunion when I had just turned 28. Back then, Ethan was thoughtful, funny, and incredibly attentive. He noticed the tiniest things, how I'd tuck my hair behind my ear when I was nervous, or how my voice softened when I talked about my favorite books. I remember thinking that if I could spend my life with someone like him, I'd be the luckiest woman alive. After nearly a year of dating, we got married. In the beginning, I really believed I'd found the right partner. But that early happiness slowly started to fade as time went on. Ethan began to change. He grew distant and stopped trying to improve his situation. His job barely paid enough to cover essentials, and whenever I gently encouraged him to explore better opportunities, he'd dismiss me, sometimes saying things like, "You're not my boss, so stop trying to control me." I tried countless times to have calm, honest conversations with him, hoping he'd understand I only wanted the best for us. But the more I tried, the more he pulled away. Even when my company had an opening in the administrative department, a position that required nothing more than good communication skills and a bit of professionalism, the salary was more than twice what Ethan was making. I even spoke personally with our HR director to keep the spot open for him. But when I mentioned it, Ethan frowned and snapped, "So now you think I'm that useless? You need to find me a job like I can't handle my own life. Don't interfere in my business." I was stunned. I couldn't understand how someone who once claimed to love me so deeply could twist genuine concern into an insult. His pride and stubbornness left me speechless. Still, I told myself to stay calm. Maybe if I kept things stable, he'd eventually come around. Every month, I quietly transferred $1,200 into Ethan's account as a living allowance. Within 2 weeks, it was gone. Then came the usual complaints about rising food prices, gas costs, and how hard life was. I never argued, even though I knew exactly where most of the money went: limited edition sneakers, online gaming, and late-night takeout. It wasn't about the money, it was about what it represented. He never once asked if I was tired after back business trips or noticed when I worked late into the night sending out reports and emails. In his mind, I was just a woman living comfortably off his efforts. He truly believed he was the one holding our life together, when in reality, I was the one quietly keeping everything from falling apart. I remember one afternoon when my mother stopped by to help around the house while I was tied up in online meetings. By the time Ethan came home, the place looked spotless. He tossed his keys on the table and muttered something that made my mother pause mid-step. "Another stranger in my house again. Can I not get some peace and quiet here?" I froze for a second, then stood up, trying to hold my anger steady. "She's not a stranger, Ethan. She's my mother. She came here to help us, not to be insulted like that." He shrugged and said flatly, "That's how you see it, not me. I have a right to feel uncomfortable in my own home." I turned away before he could see the tears welling up. That was the first time I felt something break, something I knew couldn't be fixed. After that day, a quiet emptiness settled between us. We still lived together, shared meals, sometimes watched TV on the same couch, but it felt mechanical. The warmth was gone. No hugs, no good night kisses, just two people existing under one roof out of habit, not love. Ethan became more irritable with time. He'd lose his temper over the smallest things: a towel folded differently, the TV remote misplaced, a missing pair of socks. He even blamed me when the coffee maker stopped working, though he'd been the one to use it last. It felt like I'd become the target for every frustration in his life. One evening, I came home from a stressful client meeting, still in heels, my laptop bag slipping off my shoulder. Ethan stood in the kitchen, holding one of his shirts. "This isn't even ironed," he snapped. "Do you ever do anything right?" I let out a short, hollow laugh, trying not to cry. I used to be the woman closing deals worth millions, leading boardroom negotiations with confidence and grace. Now, I was being scolded over a wrinkled shirt. I didn't argue anymore. Every time I tried to explain, he twisted my words, found new ways to make me the problem. My body was functioning, but my soul felt exhausted, like I was slowly fading inside a life I no longer recognized. I remember one winter when I came down with a bad flu. My fever was high, my body ached, and I could barely lift my head from the pillow. I thought maybe just this once, Ethan would show a little concern, bring me medicine, a glass of water, or even ask if I was okay. Instead, he stood by the doorway, arms crossed, and said flatly, "Try to get better soon. I don't have time to take care of you." Those words cut deeper than the illness itself. That wasn't what a husband said to his wife. It was what a stranger might say when forced to live with someone they couldn't stand. A coldness settled over me that day, one I couldn't shake. The loneliness became unbearable. I often lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering when things had gone so wrong. When did the man who once held my hand at our wedding, promising to stand by me through everything, become the one who made me feel most alone? I started losing sleep, waking up in the middle of the night with my chest tight and my mind racing. I couldn't understand why I was still there, why a strong, successful woman who had fought through every challenge in her life was now trapped in a marriage that was quietly destroying her. I didn't tell anyone, not even my mother, Frances, who had always been my safe place, my biggest supporter. She called often, but I always said, "I'm fine, Mom. Everything's okay." I didn't want her to worry, or to see how broken I felt inside. But Ethan eventually dragged her into it in the worst way. One Saturday afternoon, my mother came over, carrying a pot of my favorite homemade stew and a basket of fresh fruit. We were chatting in the kitchen when Ethan walked in. He took one look at her, sighed loudly, and dropped his work bag on the floor. "Someone's always here," he muttered under his breath. "Can't I have one quiet weekend?" My mother froze for a moment, then smiled politely and said, "I just came by to see Sophie for a bit. I won't stay long." Ethan shrugged, opened the fridge, grabbed a soda, and said without looking at me, "I'm not having dinner with guests. Some people don't know how to respect boundaries." My heart sank. My mother set her bowl down slowly, her face tightening though she tried to hide it. "I think I should go," she said softly. "I'll visit another time." I walked her to the door, barely able to speak. When the door closed behind her, I turned back to Ethan, my voice trembling but firm. "Do you realize how cruel you're being?" He looked at me, completely unfazed, and said nothing. Ethan's eyes were cold when he said, "I'm just being honest. If you can't handle that, that's your problem." I stood there in the stillness of the kitchen, surrounded by the faint hum of the refrigerator and the echo of his words. The house that once felt warm now felt like a hollow shell. Everything I had worked so hard to build, my home, my marriage, my sense of safety, was slowly crumbling, piece by piece. I didn't know then that only a few weeks later everything would change, and in my weakest moment, I would finally see Ethan for who he really was. It happened suddenly. I don't remember the exact moment I collapsed, just the dull glow of the office lights flickering before everything went black. When I opened my eyes, I was in a hospital bed at Denver General, and Roman 4 in my arm, the faint beeping of monitors surrounding me. My head felt heavy, as if I'd just surfaced from a storm I didn't remember entering. The doctor stood beside me and said gently, "You fainted from severe exhaustion. We'll need to run more tests. Some of your results look a bit concerning." At first, I brushed it off. I'd always been strong, used to long hours and constant pressure. I thought a few days of rest would fix everything. But 2 days later, they moved me to a private room. That's when the doctor came in holding my chart, his tone careful but direct. "Sophie," he said, "we've found a small tumor in your pancreas. Thankfully, it's early stage, but you'll need to begin treatment immediately. It won't be easy." His words blurred into background noise. I could see his lips moving, but it felt like the world had gone silent. I wasn't afraid of being sick. What terrified me was facing it alone. That night, my hands trembling, I sent Ethan a short text. "I'm in the hospital. I need to talk to you." He read it, but he never replied. I called him that night. The phone rang several times before going to voicemail. No message, no text, no word of concern followed, just silence, so I began treatment on my own. The infusions left me drained. My energy slipped away bit by bit. Food lost its flavor, my hair thinned, and every time I caught my reflection in the mirror, I saw a stranger looking back frail, pale, but with eyes still holding a flicker of fight. I kept going, not because I believed Ethan would come back, but because I refused to let him be the reason I gave up. Somewhere deep down, I still wanted to face him strong, standing, unbroken. For 2 weeks, I endured everything alone. Not a single visit from family or friends. I lied to my mother, Frances, telling her I was traveling for business, just so she wouldn't worry. Then one Thursday afternoon, the door to my hospital room opened. For a moment, I thought I was hallucinating. Ethan stood there, hands tucked in his pockets, face blank, eyes colder than I'd ever seen them. "You're here," I whispered, my voice weak and rough from exhaustion. He didn't answer right away. He walked in slowly, set a brown folder on the bedside table, and said in a flat, measured tone, as if he were closing a business deal, "I've filed for divorce. The house and the car will stay in my name. That seems fair. As for you, well, I don't know how long you'll be around." The air left my lungs. I couldn't even speak. It wasn't the shock of him leaving that hurt. I had already felt that loss long ago. What broke me was the coldness in every word, the complete absence of compassion from the man I once thought was my partner. He hadn't come to see if I was okay. He'd come to claim what he thought was his, like my existence had already expired in his mind. I pressed my lips together, swallowing every emotion that tried to surface. I refused to let him see me cry. I didn't want him to see me broken. I simply nodded and said quietly, "Take whatever you want, Ethan. Thank you for stopping by." He hesitated for a second, maybe caught off guard by how calm I sounded. Then he gave a small shrug, turned toward the door, and muttered, "Not like you really have a choice anyway." When the door clicked shut, I didn't cry. I didn't even feel anger. Instead, a cold, steady smile formed on my lips. I whispered under my breath, "You just woke up the real me, Ethan, and soon you'll understand what that means." I reached for the bedside phone and dialed the one person I trusted completely, Eric, my company's chief financial officer. He had been with me from the beginning, loyal, discreet, and the only one who truly understood how much control I actually held. "Eric," I said, my voice calm but deliberate, "I need your help with something important." There was a brief silence, then he replied, "I've been waiting for this call, Sophie. Just tell me what you need." I closed my eyes, exhaled slowly, and said, "You'll know soon enough." As I lay in that quiet hospital room, sunlight spilling softly through the curtains, I felt an unexpected sense of peace. Maybe it was because I had finally made a decision not to fight for Ethan, but to finally let him go. He wanted to discard me at my weakest, fine. But what he didn't realize was that I wasn't the one who needed freeing. It was him, from the illusion of power he thought he had, from the life that I had carried entirely on my shoulders. 3 days later, Eric arrived at the hospital. No flowers, no polite smiles, just a sleek leather briefcase that he set gently on the table beside my bed. "Are you certain you want to move forward with this?" he asked quietly. I met his gaze without hesitation. "Yes," I said, "and I want everything to start tomorrow." He nodded once. He understood exactly what that meant. Eric was the only person in the entire company who knew the truth, that I had registered the business under my mother's name to keep my identity hidden. It wasn't just for privacy. It was to protect what I'd built from people who saw success as a weapon instead of a gift. For years, I'd chosen to live quietly. I never wanted Ethan to know that the company his job relied on existed because of me. In hindsight, maybe that was my mistake, mistaking kindness for protection. The next morning, I signed a short letter on company letterhead. It was simple, only a few paragraphs long, but its impact would echo far beyond the page. Effective immediately, this letter serves as formal notice of termination for the supply agreement between Metasphere Distribution and Vital Tech Logistics. That contract accounted for over 60% of Vital Tech's quarterly revenue, the same deal Ethan had bragged about landing a year ago. I could still remember the night he came home, full of pride, talking about how he'd helped his company secure a huge partnership with a major medical supplier. He had no idea that major supplier was sitting just one room away, listening quietly, smiling softly. At 8:00 a.m. Monday, the termination letter went out. By 3:00 p.m., my assistant transferred a call from Mr. Peterson, the CEO of Vital Tech. His voice was tight, professional, but uneasy. "We're quite surprised by this decision," he said. "If possible, we'd like to understand the reason." I kept my tone calm, but unshakably firm. "I've been informed that one of your employees has shown inappropriate conduct, repeated disrespect toward female colleagues, and possible misuse of company resources. As a major partner, I cannot support that." There was silence on the other end. I could almost hear him putting the pieces together. There was a long pause on the phone before Mr. Peterson finally asked, "May I have the name of that employee?" I answered evenly, "Ethan Ward." That afternoon, Ethan came home later than usual, his face pale and drawn. He didn't know that earlier that morning, my lawyer had already sent a counter-divorce filing one that required him to vacate the house within 30 days. That house, of course, was mine. I'd bought it years ago, only adding his name to the deed out of pride and the foolish hope that it would make him feel like an equal. He walked to the fridge, grabbed a bottle of water, and stood there in silence for a while. Then, in a voice that was almost fragile, he said, "I got laid off." I set my book down carefully, meeting his eyes without surprise. "Because of the terminated contract with SilverMed," I said quietly. He turned sharply, confusion flickering across his face. How do you know that?" I stood, walked slowly to my desk, opened the top drawer, and pulled out a thick envelope. Setting it gently on the table, I said, calm and steady, "Because I'm the one who ended that contract. I'm the CEO of SilverMed, Ethan, the company you bragged about landing, the one you said you were smart enough to win over." He froze completely. His eyes darted between me and the envelope, disbelief written all over his face. "For all these years," I continued, "I paid every bill in this house. I covered your credit card debt. I paid your cousin's son's tuition when your family couldn't. I even transferred you $1,500 every month because I believed in something called love." Ethan took a shaky step back. His fingers trembled as he tore open the envelope and skimmed the papers inside. His lips moved, but the words barely came out. This can't be real." I smiled, not out of pride or revenge, but out of finality. "Oh, it's real," I said softly. "For once, you're seeing me as I truly am." "Divorce papers," I said, sliding the folder across the table toward him. "Asset division terms, your scheduled meeting with my lawyer, and a notice to vacate the house within 30 days. The mortgage is $3,300 a month, Ethan. I won't be covering that anymore." He just stood there, motionless, his expression blank as reality began to sink in. The silence between us grew heavy, thick with the sound of his own breathing, and the weight of everything he'd just lost. I turned away, calm and steady, leaving him surrounded by papers, numbers, and the brutal truth he'd never prepared for. There was no anger in me anymore, no satisfaction either, just clarity. Ethan had lived too long under the shelter of a life I'd built. It was time for him to stand under his own sky, even if it burned. 3 days later, close to midnight, the phone in my hospital room rang. I was weak from my second round of chemo, my body aching. But when I saw his name flashing on the screen, I knew. The panic had begun. I answered quietly, "Yes." His voice cracked through the receiver, trembling, broken. "Sophie, please just hear me out." I said nothing. He sounded different, no arrogance, no edge, just desperation. "I was wrong," he whispered. "I was so wrong. I thought you were just some dependent woman, someone who needed me. But you were everything. You were the reason my life even worked." On the other end of the line was a man in free fall, clinging to the very person he once abandoned without hesitation. I closed my eyes, letting the silence stretch between us. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel small or hurt or angry. I just felt free, but now I know. Ethan said through the phone, his voice cracking, "You were the one holding everything together. You were the reason my life didn't fall apart." I placed the phone on speaker, leaned back against my pillow and closed my eyes, not out of emotion, but out of curiosity, to finally listen to every desperate word I'd once wished to hear back when I lay in a hospital bed alone, praying he would care. "I've lost everything," he continued, his voice trembling with panic. "The house is about to be foreclosed. I can't make the payments. The company didn't just fire me, they blacklisted me. No one will hire me now. Sophie, please give me another chance." I opened my eyes, watching the faint glow of the hospital nightlight against the wall. My voice came out calm, steady, and cold. "A chance? You had an entire decade, Ethan. 10 years to respect me, to love me, to understand me. And you chose not to. You only see my worth now that everything you depended on is gone. It's too late." He tried again, his voice cracking. "I know you're angry, but we were happy once. Please remember those times, I'm begging you." I smiled faintly, almost sadly. "Ethan, do you remember the name Elisa?" There was instant silence. I could hear his breath hitch, the panic returning. How did you find out about that?" I spoke each word slowly, sharp and deliberate. "The CEO of Vital Tech called to apologize. He mentioned they'd conducted an internal investigation after an employee complaint surfaced. Turns out your behavior wasn't as private as you thought." The silence on the line stretched long and heavy. For once, Ethan had nothing left to say. "It turns out," I said evenly, "you had a personal relationship with the new intern, Alyssa Morgan, 24 years old, daughter of the Chicago branch director." Should I go into detail about those late overtime nights? There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. Then, stammering, "No, Sophie, it's not what you think." "It wasn't like that. You're right," I replied coldly. "It was worse than I thought." And with that, I ended the call. No screaming, no tears, just quiet finality. I opened my contacts, hit block, and stared at the phone for a long moment before sending a short email to my lawyer. Add a no-contact clause to the divorce proceedings. Also prepare a civil suit for breach of marital duty. In Colorado, proof of infidelity allowed a spouse to seek damages, and I had more than enough evidence. The next morning, Eliza Harper, my attorney, arrived at the hospital. She laid a file on the tray beside my bed. "You should see this," she said softly. Inside were screenshots, messages between Ethan and Alyssa, late-night texts filled with flirting, hotel bookings, even selfies taken inside the Vital Tech office, all time-stamped, all geotagged. I didn't feel shock, just relief. Relief that every uneasy feeling, every late night of doubt, now had a name and a face. I've sent a formal demand for $84,000 in emotional damages. Eliza continued, "He'll probably fight it, but with this evidence the court will be in your favor." I nodded slowly. It wasn't about the money. It was about restoring what he tried to take from me, my dignity. A week later, I was released from the hospital for home monitoring. My body was still weak, but my mind had never been clearer. During that week, Ethan tried to reach me through every possible channel: emails, social media messages, even showing up at Silver Med's main office. He didn't know that security had strict orders not to let him within 50 feet of the building. Each attempt to contact me only confirmed what I already knew. He wasn't trying to win me back. He was trying to win back the life that had existed because of me. Ethan never really loved me. He just didn't know how to exist without me. Once that realization settled in, I opened my laptop and began rewriting my financial plans, clean, simple, efficient. This time there was no husband's living expenses column, no allowances, no shared accounts, just me and the future I wanted to build on my own terms. I also approved Eric's proposal to hand over the COO position to a new hire, allowing me to finally step back from the relentless pace of work. For the first time in years, I wanted to breathe, not chase, not prove, just live. When I moved into my new home on the edge of Denver, it felt like shedding an old skin. On my first evening there, I stood on the balcony, the sunset painting the sky in soft gold and violet. The breeze brushed through my short new hair, thin but growing again after months of treatment. I closed my eyes and smiled. I didn't need anyone to make me feel whole. I just needed me steady, self-assured, and free from the weight of anyone else's definition of love or worth. Meanwhile, word of Ethan's downfall spread through the local business community like wildfire. Vital Tech's contract losses made headlines in trade circles, and his termination record was quietly shared among partner companies. In a matter of weeks, Ethan Ward became the name no one wanted to associate with the logistics manager at the center of a scandal, soon to face legal action for marital misconduct. With nowhere else to go, he ended up crashing with an old friend in a rundown apartment complex on the outskirts of town. A few weeks later, I heard he sold the car he once called his symbol of freedom. Most of the money went straight to paying off credit card debt, the same cards he had used to buy sneakers, gadgets, and expensive meals he thought made him feel powerful. No one wanted to hire a man with a tainted record and no real skill to stand on. The empire he thought he built had never been his to begin with, it had always been mine. Eventually, Ethan had to face the life he'd built without me. He took a night shift job at a delivery warehouse on the edge of Denver, the kind that barely paid enough to cover rent and utilities. Calls from collection agencies started coming in one after another, echoing through his tiny apartment late at night. Not the kind of calls that ask how you're doing, but the kind that remind you what you owe. As for Alyssa Morgan, the young woman he once spent those late nights with, she disappeared from social media just days after the scandal broke. I didn't think about her much until Eliza, my lawyer, mentioned that Alyssa's family had quietly agreed to settle part of the damages privately to avoid public litigation. Word was that her parents had taken her back to their family farm in Iowa, cutting her off from the life she once flaunted. For them, that was the only way to salvage what was left of their reputation. Meanwhile, my final treatment ended on a crisp autumn morning. I still remember the doctor looking up from the report with a smile and saying, "Your test results are completely clear." I didn't cry. I didn't even speak. I just smiled and reached out to shake his hand. It wasn't just recovery, it was rebirth. 2 months later, I returned to Silver Med, not as the same woman who had once tried to hold a marriage and a career together, but as someone lighter, freer, and whole. The team gathered in the main conference room when I walked in. They stood and clapped, their smiles warm and genuine. Eric handed me a coffee mug that read, "Welcome back, boss." For a moment, I just stood there, taking it in, the faces of people who respected me, not for who I was married to, but for who I had always been. In the following months, I received more than a few invitations, dinners, charity galas, casual coffee dates. Some from business associates, others from old friends who'd quietly followed my story. I turned them all down, not out of bitterness, but because I finally understood something simple yet profound. I didn't need to rush into anyone else's arms to feel complete. For now, it was enough to wake up every morning in a home that was mine, to walk into an office I'd built from the ground up, and to live each day without the weight of someone who once mistook my love for dependence. I had survived, and I had returned not just healed but stronger than ever. I eventually bought a small lakeside house in Duluth, where the mornings greeted me with the soft glow of sunrise and the evenings echoed with birdsong. It wasn't grand, not as luxurious as the home I once shared with Ethan, but it was mine, quiet, peaceful, and untouched by anyone unless invited. One weekend afternoon, while I brewed tea in the kitchen, Eric stopped by. We sat on the porch watching the golden light dance across the lake's surface. "Have you ever thought about getting married again?" he asked, half teasing. I smiled, stirring my tea gently. "Not right now, maybe someday. But for now, I'm happy just like this." He nodded, understanding. The breeze carried the scent of pine and fresh earth, and in that stillness, I realized something deeper. I hadn't just overcome Ethan or the illness. I had conquered the fear that once kept me quiet, the fear that made me shrink to fit someone else's comfort. As I took a slow sip of tea, I thought to myself, in the end, I became the author of my own story. Resilience, I've learned, doesn't come from moments of strength. It comes from the moments you rise again, after you've been broken, doubted, and left behind. Once I gave my heart to someone who didn't deserve it. Once I silenced my own voice to keep the peace. But now I live for myself, not to impress, not to please, but simply to be free. True happiness began the moment I chose my self-respect over everything else. If you were moved by Sophie's journey, tell me what part resonated most with you in the comments below. And don't forget to follow the channel for more real stories of courage, healing, and second chances. Stories that remind us that sometimes losing everything is how we finally find ourselves.